ball hanging from a large number of thin cotton strings for free. Imagine a ball hanging from a large number of thin cotton strings. The ball is 1,000 pounds. Each individual string can only hold approximately 5 to 10 pounds without breaking. But with around 200 strings attached, the ball is held up. Now imagine, one by one, the strings begin to get cut. After the first string is cut, nothing happens. After the second, the third, the 10th, the 20th, still nothing happens. But as the number of total strings reduces, the likelihood that the next cut string will cause everything to fall increases. Eventually, if no more strings are added, one string will be the final string, when the weight will no longer be withstandable, and all the other strings will begin to snap, the whole system collapsing. Though it will appear to be this one string, one cut, one act, that is the cause of everything falling, of course, each prior cut string will have been equally relevant. We will simply only know how close we were, how much damage we had caused, after that last string is cut. For many of us, this is what today's world can often feel like. Humanity constantly and fervently cutting and adding strings to hold up a very heavy world, each of us watching, fretting, and hoping that everything will sustain, that no one will cut that last string. Of course, this is not an entirely unique or new feeling. Throughout all of history, people have worried about the state of things, fearing and predicting the end of everything, at least on some level. Fears of doomsdays, the wraths of God, cosmic order and disorder, and so on, have all owned a significant amount of real estate in the province of human history. But, arguably, things feel different now. The world feels weirder. That once paranoia we attached to myths and gods now feels like it has a real, justifiable object to attach to: the human project. In truth, things feel weird and different now because things are weird and different now. Of course, change is the only constant in history, but the rate and weirdness of change is not. Current humans are experiencing a degree of change in their individual lifetimes that the vast majority of humans haven't experienced across generations. Just over the last 30 or 40 years, an individual has experienced life without the existence of the internet, in a condition of society where faith and religions, institutions, and traditions was still prominent, to a world inundated by the internet, and then smartphones and smart devices, to a world coordinated by algorithms instead of human intention, where content, trends, and events pop up and disappear like bubbles in a whirlpool, to a world swarmed by bots and AI, where fake things seem real and real things seem fake, to a world where faith in institutions, religions, and traditional orientations is approaching the minority, to a world where, who knows? These are just some of the major differences in the conditions of society, work, technology, relationships, and life itself that have and do occur across decades or less now. Our childhoods are now not only distant from us in time, but in reality. Phases are not merely different chapters in our lives, but different chapters in different books. Naturally, this can create a high level of unease and disorientation, and naturally, this unease and disorientation can lead to high levels of cynicism and despair. The political scientist, Brian Klaas, describes humanity's current condition as an inversion of stability dynamics, where, as a species, we've gone from the historical dynamic of local instability and global stability to local stability and global instability. In other words, we've gone from daily life being largely unpredictable and precarious, while global conditions, or large-scale and temporal conditions, remained relatively consistent, to precisely the opposite, where now, daily life for most people is generally consistent and safe, but global conditions, political, economic, environmental, and technological, are highly volatile and unpredictable. Klaas writes, "The past was largely defined by local instability. Day-to-day life was unpredictable. One day you could be healthy, the next day you could be dead, struck down by a mysterious plague. Childbirth was a death trap. Starvation was a constant threat, as crops might inexplicably fail, or animals that were once abundant were suddenly nowhere to be found. But our distant ancestors also experienced global stability. That didn't mean that the world never changed, but rather that, broadly speaking, society ticked along more or less in similar ways from one generation to the next. If your parents were agrarian peasants, you were likely to be an agrarian peasant. Think back to when you were younger, and you just started to properly comprehend the phenomenon of the future. Like most people, you likely began to imagine and predict things that the future might hold. Who you would be, what you would do, what the world would be like. By a certain age, we likely felt as though, if we squinted hard enough, we could almost see 5, 10, 20 years or more out into the horizon of the future. As we've continued to get older, this sort of impulse to stand on the edge of the present and look out, trying to imagine, predict, and control the future, continues for most of us. But now, no matter how hard we seem to squint, it can seem like there is almost nothing to see. There's too much instability and uncertainty to see anything other than instability and uncertainty. But in all honesty, when we first began making our predictions about what the future might be like, how accurate were we then? How accurate has anyone ever been, across individual lives and across history? We are terrible psychics, but we are good mechanics. The future has always been unknowable and unpredictable. The world has always been chaotic and gruesome. We have always had to fashion everything out of nothing and fix all the inevitable broken and faulty parts. We simply know and feel just how unpredictable and chaotic the world is, as it now sits in the palm of our hands and flashes across our retinas 24/7. Now we know and feel just how much work there is to be done. The irony is, during a time when the conditions of the world and future are most unclear, when change is most rapid and hard to predict, so many of us are so sure of our pessimism and cynicism. So many of us are so sure the world is inevitably and irredeemably going the wrong direction. Of course, this is not to reduce or scoff at just how powerful and potentially destructive we are now compared to other times in history. Nuclear weapons, humanity's effects on the climate and environment, massive inequality, the pervasive hypnotizing nature of social media, biological access and manipulation, AI and other technological powers, and so on, are all new, very legitimate concerns. But this is to suggest that we are not and cannot be sure where any of this goes. We are, as a species, teenagers at best, destructive, ignorant, weird, and self-aggrandizing. But, as teenagers, if we survive our recklessness and make the right decisions, we are on course for adulthood, for wisdom and maturity, if we make the right decisions. The future isn't some abstract sci-fi concept. It is a real place, but it isn't a defined place, and it isn't a guaranteed place. We form and preserve it in every moment, with all our decisions and habits, both individually and collectively. In the words of the American anthropologist David Graeber, the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just as easily make differently. As individuals and as a species, we are always forming new habits and ceasing old ones. Though it often doesn't seem like it, in many ways, we are growing wiser. What better sign of this collective wisdom could there be than the increasing self-loathing over our ignorance? Currently, we are the freest, most educated, healthiest, and wealthiest we have ever been as a species. Only 200 years ago, only 12% of the global population could read and write. Today, nearly 90% of the world can, with a global population that has also grown 8-fold since then. Global life expectancy 200 years ago was roughly 30 years. Today, it is in the 70s. 200 years ago, there were essentially no democracies, in the modern sense. Today, nearly half the world is run via some form of liberal or electoral democracy. Never has there been less life-threatening diseases and less human-on-human violence. Of course, there are many, many other problems, both new and old, that still need serious attention. But there is no good, clear reason to assume that, if everything continues mostly on course, things won't continue in an upright direction. The problem with all of this, returning to that original feeling of witnessing the weighted ball of earth suspended by thin cotton strings, of which humanity seems to increasingly and fervently cut to use as material, is that no matter what happens in the long run, no matter how good things are in certain areas now compared to in the past, we don't live in the long run. We don't live in the past, and we don't live in the data and lines of graphs and charts. We live here and now, in our heads, a strange place in a strange place. As the historian and writer Yuval Noah Harari writes, we do not become satisfied by leading a peaceful and prosperous existence. Rather, we become satisfied when reality matches our expectations. The bad news is that as conditions improve, expectations balloon. We are each personally faced with the task of understanding, managing, and mitigating our expectations, our perceptions, hopes, and values. We cannot control the world or predict the future, but we can perhaps, on some level, control how much we try to. For each of us, there are also thin cotton strings that hold us up, and with each personal choice and habit, we contribute to the cutting or adding of these strings. Every time we avoid some amount of social media, every time we choose to disengage from some amount of the news, every time we choose to engage more with our partners, our friends, our families, our communities, every time we choose to create art and exercise the body, every time we choose some form of hope and openness over certain forms of cynicism and clinging to control, every time we choose compassion over bitterness, we retain and add more strings. This is not to say that concerning ourselves with our future, both personal and collective, or that striving to control and improve areas of life and society wherever we can, or that enjoying the pleasures of modern technology, or that being realistic and sometimes cynical are bad, but rather, concerning ourselves too much with these things often is. As Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, he who fights with monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster himself. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes into you also. We have work to do on a societal and global level. Work to ensure that things get better for everyone and stay stable and around. But we also have work to do on an individual level. Work to ensure that we stay stable and around. Optimism and hope are not universal philosophies. They are weapons and tools that we can sharpen and use when appropriate and when needed. Real generosity towards the future lies in giving all to the present, wrote Albert Camus. We have never ventured out this far. The landscape is precarious and unknown, but we have prepared the best we can, and we've brought all our best gear. We have survived everything up until now, individually and collectively. That doesn't mean we will survive everything, or that everything will be good, but it does mean that we and things can. The fears and prophecies, the doomsdays and apocalypses, the gods and myths, the storms and wars, we have outsmarted and survived it all. Not without fear, but in spite of it. Not without risk, but in the face of it. Of course, much has been lost in the process. It has not all been and is not without destruction and bloodshed, but we've also reduced the destruction and bloodshed in the process. We are always on the brink, one person and one choice away from the final string being cut. But it hasn't been cut yet, and we are constantly hanging more. Things are precarious, humans are deeply ignorant and often awful, but things are also unfathomably interesting and exciting, and humans are often brilliant and kind. Perhaps the best reason to continue is merely to see what happens, to be surprised, to find out how wrong our predictions were, and maybe, just maybe, how right our hopes and efforts were. In the words of Harari, each and every one of us has been born into a given historical reality, ruled by particular norms and values and managed by a unique economic and political system. We take this reality for granted, thinking it is natural, inevitable, and immutable. We forget that our world was created by an accidental chain of events, and that history shaped not only our technology, politics, and society, but also our thoughts, fears, and dreams. The cold hand of the past emerges from the grave of our ancestors, grips us by the neck, and directs our gaze towards a single future. We have felt that grip from the moment we were born, so we assume that it is a natural and inescapable part of who we are. Therefore, we seldom try to shake ourselves free and envision alternative futures. This is the best reason to learn history, not in order to predict the future, but to free yourself of the past and imagine alternative destinies. Whether we want to participate in the future through social organization education, business, philanthropy, entertainment, or whatever else, having a professional, fully functioning website and the tools to manage it is crucial. Thanks to this video sponsor, Odoo, building and managing a website and business to carry out whatever your goals and visions are in the world is now easier than ever, just a few clicks and minutes away. For example, if you wanted to start a blog or educational website that explores something like the intersection of technology and culture, all you need to do is fill out a few prompts about the topic, choose the color palette you like, determine the features you want, pick the right theme, and then it's a simple drag and drop, plug and play process until you have exactly what you want. It's quick, easy, and requires no background knowledge on website building, coding, or software management. The results are a beautiful, modern, and professional website in minutes for free. Odoo is not only offering this first app you use for free for life, but also unlimited hosting and support, as well as the first year of your domain name for free. And with fully integrated apps for e-commerce, accounting, inventory management, assisting with project goals, and much more, Odoo has essentially everything you'll ever need.
They call Jeffrey Hinton. They call you the godfather of AI.
Yes, they do.
Why do they call you that?
There weren't that many people who believed that we could make neural networks work, artificial neural networks. So for a long time in AI, from the 1950s onwards, there were kind of two ideas about how to do AI. One idea was that sort of core of human intelligence was reasoning. And to do reasoning, you needed to use some form of logic. And so AI had to be based around logic. And in your head, you must have something like symbolic expressions that you manipulated with rules. And that's how intelligence worked. And things like learning or reasoning by analogy, they'd all come later once we've figured out how basic reasoning works. There was a different approach, which is to say, let's model AI on the brain, because obviously the brain makes us intelligent. So simulate a network of brain cells on a computer and try and figure out how you would learn strengths of connections between brain cells so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images, or recognize speech, or even do reasoning. I pushed that approach for like 50 years. Because so few people believed in it, there weren't many good universities that had groups that did that. So if you did that, the best young students who believed in that came and worked with you. So I was very fortunate in getting a whole lot of really good students.
Some of which have gone on to create and play an instrumental role in creating platforms like OpenAI.
Yes, so Ilya Sutskever would be a nice example, a whole bunch of them.
Why did you believe that modeling it off the brain was a more effective approach?
It wasn't just me believed it. Early on, von Neumann believed it, and Turing believed it. And if either of those had lived, I think AI would have had a very different history. But they both died young.
You think AI would have been here sooner?
I think the neural net approach would have been accepted much sooner if either of them had lived.
In this season of your life, what mission are you on?
My main mission now is to warn people how dangerous AI could be.
Did you know that when you became the godfather of AI?
No, not really. I was quite slow to understand some of the risks. Some of the risks were always very obvious, like people would use AI to make autonomous lethal weapons. That is, things that go around deciding by themselves who to kill. Other risks, like the idea that they would one day get smarter than us and maybe would become irrelevant, I was slow to recognize that. Other people recognized it 20 years ago. I only recognized it a few years ago that was a real risk that might be coming quite soon.
How could you not have foreseen that if with everything you know here about cracking the ability for these computers to learn similar to how humans learn, and just introducing any rate of improvement,
It's a very good question. How could you not have seen that? But remember, neural networks 20 or 30 years ago were very primitive in what they could do. They were nowhere near as good as humans at things like vision and language and speech recognition. The idea that you have to now worry about it getting smarter than people, that seems silly then.
When did that change?
It changed for the general population when ChatGPT came out. It changed for me when I realized that the kinds of digital intelligences we're making have something that makes them far superior to the kind of biological intelligence we have. If I want to share information with you, so I go off and I learn something, and I'd like to tell you what I learned. So I produce some sentences. This is a rather simplistic model, but roughly right. Your brain is trying to figure out, how can I change the strength of connections between neurons so I might have put that word next? And so you'll do a lot of learning when a very surprising word comes, and not much learning when it's a very obvious word. If I say fish and chips, you don't do much learning when I say chips. But if I say fish and cucumber, you do a lot more learning. You wonder, why did I say cucumber? So that's roughly what's going on in your brain.
I'm predicting what's coming next.
That's how we think it's working. Nobody really knows for sure how the brain works, and nobody knows how it gets the information about whether you should increase the strength of a connection or decrease the strength of a connection. That's the crucial thing. But what we do know now from AI is that if you could get information about whether to increase or decrease the connection strength so as to do better at whatever task you're trying to do, then we could learn incredible things, because that's what we're doing now with artificial neural nets. It's just we don't know for real brains how they get that signal about whether to increase or decrease.
As we sit here today, what are the big concerns you have around safety of AI? If we were to list the top couple that are really front of mind and that we should be thinking about.
Can I have more than a couple?
Go ahead, I'll write them all down and we'll go through them.
Okay, first of all, I want to make a distinction between two completely different kinds of risk. There's risks that come from people misusing AI,
Yeah.
and that's most of the risks and all of the short-term risks. And then there's risks that come from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
And I talk mainly about that second risk because lots of people say, is that a real risk? And yes, it is. Now, we don't know how much of a risk it is. We've never been in that situation before. We've never had to deal with things smarter than us. So really the thing about that existential threat is that we have no idea how to deal with it. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And anybody who tells you they know just what's going to happen and how to deal with it, they're talking nonsense. So we don't know how to estimate the probabilities it'll replace us. Some people say it's like less than 1%. My friend Jan Lacan, who was a postdoc with me, thinks, no. We're always going to be, we build these things, we're always going to be in control. We'll build them to be obedient. And other people, like Yudkowsky, say, no, these things are going to wipe us out for sure. If anybody builds it, it's going to wipe us all out. And he's confident of that. I think both of those positions are extreme. It's very hard to estimate the probabilities in between.
If you had to bet on who was right out of your two friends?
I simply don't know. So if I had to bet, I'd say the probabilities in between, and I don't know where to estimate in between. I often say 10 to 20% chance they'll wipe us out, but that's just gut, based on the idea that we're still making them, and we're pretty ingenious. And the hope is that if enough smart people do enough research with enough resources, we'll figure out a way to build them so they'll never want to harm us.
Sometimes I think if we talk about that second path, sometimes I think about nuclear bombs and the invention of the atomic bomb and how it compares. Like, how is this different? Because the atomic bomb came along, and I imagine a lot of people at that time thought our days are numbered.
Yes, I was there. We did.
Yeah, but we're still here.
We're still here, yes. So the atomic bomb was really only good for one thing, and it was very obvious how it worked. even if you hadn't had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was obvious that it was a very big bomb that was very dangerous. With AI, it's good for many, many things. It's going to be magnificent in healthcare and education, and more or less any industry that needs to use its data is going to be able to use it better with AI. So we're not going to stop the development. You know, people say, well, why don't we just stop it now? We're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things. Also, we're not going to stop it because it's good for battle robots, and none of the countries that sell weapons are going to want to stop it. Like the European regulations, they have some regulations about AI. It's good they have some regulations, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. And in particular, the European regulations have a clause in them that say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are willing to regulate companies and people, but they're not willing to regulate themselves.
It seems pretty crazy to me that I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation but the rest of the world doesn't, aren't we
Yeah,
just
it puts
putting
them at a
ourselves
competitive disadvantage.
Yeah,
So-
and we're seeing this already. I don't think people realise that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
Yes.
What does that do? That gives us a productivity disadvantage?
Yes. What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we've got.
So, free for all.
Well, what we've got is sort of, we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us. It's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's...
So I've distinguished these two kinds of risks.
Yep.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI. There's cyber attacks. So between 2023 and 2024, they increased by about a factor of 1,200%. And that's probably because these large language models make it much easier to do phishing attacks.
And a phishing attack, for anyone that doesn't know, is...
They send you something saying, hi, I'm your friend John and I'm stuck in El Salvador. Could you just wire this money? That's one kind of attack.
Yeah.
But the phishing attacks are really trying to get your login credentials.
And now with AI, they can clone my voice, my image.
They can do all that.
I'm struggling at the moment because there's a bunch of AI scams on X and also Meta. And there's one in particular on Meta, so Instagram, Facebook at the moment, which is a paid advert where they've taken my voice from the podcast, they've taken my mannerisms, and they've made a new video of me encouraging people to go and take part in this crypto Ponzi scam or whatever. And we spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end emailing Meta, telling please take this down. They take it down, another one pops up. They take that one down, another one pops up. So it's like whack-a-mole.
Yes,
and then
very annoying.
the heartbreaking part is you get the messages from people that have fallen for the scam, and they've
Right.
lost £500 or $500.
And they're cross with you because you recommended it.
And I'm sad for them.
It's very annoying.
Yeah.
I have a smaller version of that, which is some people now publish papers with me as one of the authors.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like it's in order that they can get lots of citations to themselves.
So cyber attacks, a very real threat. There's been an explosion of
Yes.
those.
And these already, obviously AI is very patient, so they can go through 100 million lines of code looking for known ways of attacking them. That's easy to do. But they're going to get more creative, and some people believe, some people who know a lot believe that maybe by 2030 they'll be creating new kinds of cyber attacks, which no person ever thought of. So that's very worrisome.
Because they can think for themselves and
They
discover
can think
new
for
ways to
themselves.
attack.
They can draw new conclusions from much more data than a person ever saw.
Is there anything you're doing to protect yourself from cyber attacks at all?
Yes. It's one of the few places where I changed what I do radically because I'm scared of cyber attacks. Canadian banks are extremely safe. In 2008, no Canadian banks came anywhere near going bust. So they're very safe banks because they're well regulated, fairly well regulated. Nevertheless, I think a cyber attack might be able to bring down a bank. Now, if you have all my savings are in shares in banks, held by banks. So if the bank gets attacked and it holds your shares, they're still your shares. And so I think you'd be okay, unless the attacker sells the shares, because the bank can sell the shares. If the attacker sells your shares, I think you're screwed. I don't know, I mean, maybe the bank would have to try and reimburse you, but the bank's bust by now, right? So I'm worried about a Canadian bank being taken down by a cyber attack and the attacker selling shares that it holds. So I've spread my money, my children's money, between 3 banks, in the belief that if a cyber attack takes down one Canadian bank, the other Canadian banks will very quickly get very careful.
And do you have a phone that's not connected to the internet? Do you have it, like, I'm thinking about storing data and stuff like that. Do you think it's wise to consider having cold storage?
I have a little disk drive and I back up my laptop on this hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have everything on my laptop on a hard drive. At least, if the whole internet went down, I had the sense I still got it on my laptop and I still got my information. Okay. Then the next thing is using AIs to create nasty viruses.
Okay.
And the problem with that is that just requires one crazy guy with a grudge. One guy who knows a little bit of molecular biology, knows a lot about AI, and just wants to destroy the world. You can now create new viruses relatively cheaply using AI. And you don't have to be a very skilled molecular biologist to do it. And that's very scary. So you could have a small cult, for example. A small cult might be able to raise a few $1 million. For a few $1 million, they might be able to design a whole bunch of viruses.
Well, I'm thinking about some of our foreign adversaries doing government-funded programs. I mean, there was lots of talk around COVID and the Wuhan laboratory and what they were doing in gain-of-function research. But I'm wondering if in, a China or a Russia or an Iran or something, the government could fund a program for a small group of scientists to make a virus that they could,
I think they could, yes. Now, they'd be worried about retaliation. They'd be worried about other governments doing the same to them. Hopefully that would help keep it under control. They might also be worried about the virus spreading to their country.
Okay.
Then there's corrupting elections.
Okay.
So if you wanted to use AI to corrupt elections, a very effective thing is to be able to do targeted political advertisements where you know a lot about the person. So, anybody who wanted to use AI for corrupting elections would try and get as much data as they could about everybody in the electorate. With that in mind, it's a bit worrying what Musk is doing at present in the States, going in and insisting on getting access to all these things that were very carefully siloed. The claim is it's to make things more efficient, but it's exactly what you would want if you intended to corrupt the next election.
How do you mean? Because you get all this data on the
You get all this data on people.
Yeah.
You know how much they make, where they live. You know everything about them. Once you know that, it's very easy to manipulate.
Because you can make an AI that...
You can send messages that they'll find very convincing, telling them not to vote, for example. So I have no reason other than common sense to think this, but I wouldn't be surprised if part of the motivation of getting all this data from American government sources is to corrupt elections. Another part might be that it's very nice training data for a good model.
But he would have to be taking that data from the government and feeding it into his...
Yes, and what they've done is turned off lots of the security controls, got rid of some of the organisation to protect against that.
So that's corrupting elections.
Okay, then there's creating these two echo chambers by organisations like YouTube and Facebook, showing people things that will make them indignant. People love to be indignant.
Indignant as in angry? Or what does indignant mean?
Feeling, I'm sort of angry but feeling righteous.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were to show me something that said, Trump did this crazy thing, here's a video of Trump doing this completely crazy thing, I would immediately click on it.
Yeah. Okay, so putting us in echo chambers and dividing us.
Yes, and that's the policy that YouTube and Facebook and others use for deciding what to show you next is causing that. If they had a policy of showing you balanced things, they wouldn't get so many clicks and they wouldn't be able to sell so many advertisements. And so it's basically the profit motive is saying, show them whatever will make them click. And what will make them click is things that are more and more extreme.
And that confirm my existing bias.
And they confirm my existing bias. So you're getting your biases confirmed all the time.
Further and further and further and further, which means you're driving away.
Which is now, in the States, there's two communities that don't hardly talk to each other.
I'm not sure people realise that this is actually happening every time they open an app, but if you go on a TikTok or a YouTube or one of these big social networks, the algorithm, as you said, is designed to show you more of the things that you had interest in last time. So if you just play that out over 10 years, it's going to drive you further and further and further into whatever ideology or belief you have, and further away from nuance and common sense and parity, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Like, people don't know it's happening. They just open their phones and experience something and think this is the news or the experience everyone else is having.
Right. So basically, if you have a newspaper and everybody gets the same newspaper,
Yeah.
you get to see all sorts of things you weren't looking for. And you get a sense that if it's in the newspaper, it's an important thing or significant thing. But if you have your own news feed, my news feed on my iPhone, 3/4 of the stories are about AI. And I find it very hard to know if the whole world's talking about AI all the time or if it's just my news feed.
Okay, so driving me into my echo chambers, which is going to continue to divide us further and further. I'm actually noticing that the algorithms are becoming even more, what's the word? Tailored. And people might go, oh, that's great. But what it means is they're becoming even more personalized, which means that my reality is becoming even further from your reality.
Yeah, it's crazy. We don't have a shared reality anymore. I share reality with other people who watch the BBC and other BBC News and other people who read The Guardian and other people who read the New York Times. I have almost no shared reality with people who watch Fox News.
It's pretty,
It's worrisome.
Yeah.
Behind all this is the idea that these companies just want to make profit and they'll do whatever it takes to make more profit.
Because they have to.
They're legally obliged to do that.
So we almost can't blame the company, can we?
Well, capitalism's done very well for us. It's produced lots of goodies.
Yeah.
But you need to have it very well regulated. So what you really want is to have rules so that when some company is trying to make as much profit as possible, in order to make that profit, they have to do things that are good for people in general, not things that are bad for people in general. So once you get to a situation where in order to make more profit, the company starts doing things that are very bad for society, like showing you things that are more and more extreme, that's what regulations are for. So you need regulations with capitalism. Now, companies will always say regulations get in the way, make us less efficient, and that's true. The whole point of regulations is to stop them doing things to make profit that hurt society. And we need strong regulation.
Who's going to decide whether it hurts society or not? Because, you know,
That's the job of politicians. Unfortunately, if the politicians are owned by the companies, that's not so good.
and also the politicians might not understand the technology. You've probably seen the Senate hearings where they wheel out, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and these big tech CEOs, and it is quite embarrassing because they're asking the wrong questions.
Well, I've seen the video of the US Education Secretary talking about how they're going to get AI in the classrooms, except she thought it was called A1. She's actually there saying we're going to have all the kids interacting with A1.
School system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, you know, every year starting, you know, that far down in the grades, and that's a wonderful thing.
And these are the people that
These are the people in charge.
ultimately the tech companies are in charge because they want
Well,
smart.
The tech companies in the States now, at least a few weeks ago when I was there, they were running an advertisement about how it was very important not to regulate AI because it would hurt us in the competition with China.
Yeah, and that's a plausible argument, no?
Yes, it will, but you have to decide, do you want to compete with China by doing things that will do a lot of harm to your society? And you probably don't.
I guess they would say that it's not just China, it's Denmark and Australia and Canada and the UK
They're not so worried about.
and Germany. But if they kneecap themselves with regulation, if they slow themselves down, then the founders, the entrepreneurs, the investors are going to go
I think
invest.
calling it kneecapping is sort of taking a particular point of view. It's taking the point of view that regulations are sort of very harmful. What you need to do is just constrain the big companies so that in order to make profit, they have to do things that are socially useful. Like Google search is a great example. That didn't need regulation because it just made information available to people. It was great. But then if you take YouTube, which starts showing you adverts and showing you more and more extreme things, that needs regulation.
But we don't have the people to regulate it, as we've identified.
I think people know pretty well that particular problem of showing you more and more extreme things. That's a well-known problem that the politicians understand. They just need to get on and regulate it.
So that was the next point, which was that the algorithms are going to drive us further into our echo chambers.
Right.
What's next?
Lethal autonomous weapons.
Lethal autonomous weapons.
That means things that can kill you and make their own decision about whether to kill you.
Which is the great dream, I guess, of the military-industrial complex, of being able to create such weapons.
So the worst thing about them is big, powerful countries always have the ability to invade smaller, poorer countries. They're just more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do that using actual soldiers, you get bodies coming back in bags, and the relatives of the soldiers who were killed don't like it. So you get something like Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, there's a lot of protest at home. If instead of bodies coming back in bags, it was dead robots, there'd be much less protest, and the military-industrial complex would like it much more, because robots are expensive. And suppose you had something that could get killed and was expensive to replace. That would be just great. Big countries can invade small countries much more easily because they don't have their soldiers being killed.
And the risk here is that these robots will malfunction, or they'll just be...
No, that's even if the robots do exactly what the people who built the robots want them to do. The risk is that it's going to make big countries invade small countries more often.
More often, because they can.
Yeah, and it's not a nice thing to do.
So it brings down the friction.
It brings down the cost of doing an invasion.
And these machines will be smarter at warfare as well. So they'll be
Well, even when the machines aren't smarter. So the lethal autonomous weapons, they can make them now. And I think all the big defense ones are busy making them. Even if they're not smarter than people, they're still very nasty, scary things.
Because I'm thinking that, they could show just a picture, go get this guy,
Yeah.
and go take out anyone he's been texting. And this little wasp.
So 2 days ago, I was visiting a friend of mine in Sussex who had a drone that cost less than £200. And the drone went up. It took a good look at me, and then it could follow me through the woods. And it was very spooky having this drone. It was about 2 meters behind me. It was looking at me. And if I moved over there, it could just track me for £200. But it was already quite spooky.
Yeah, I imagine there's, as you say, a race going on as we speak to who can build the most complex autonomous weapons. There is a risk, I often hear, that some of these things will combine and the cyber attack will release weapons.
Sure. You can get combinatorially many risks by combining these other risks. So, I mean, for example, you could get a super intelligent AI that decides to get rid of people, and the obvious way to do that is just to make one of these nasty viruses. If you made a virus that was very contagious, very lethal, and very slow, everybody would have it before they realised what was happening. I mean, I think if a superintelligence wanted to get rid of us, it would probably go for something biological like that that wouldn't affect it.
Do you think it could just very quickly turn us against each other? For example, it could send a warning on the nuclear systems in America that there's a nuclear bomb coming from Russia, or vice versa, and one retaliates.
Yeah, I mean, my basic... If you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken.
Yeah, I was thinking of my dog Pablo, my French bulldog, this morning as I left home. He has no idea where I'm going. He has no idea what I do.
Right.
I can't even talk to him.
Yeah, and the intelligence gap will be like that.
So you're telling me that if I'm Pablo, my French bulldog, I need to figure out a way to make my owner not wipe me out.
Yeah. So we have one example of that, which is mothers and babies. Evolution put a lot of work into that. Mothers are smarter than babies, but babies are in control. And they're in control because the mother just can't bear lots of hormones and things, but the mother just can't bear the sound of the baby crying.
Not all mothers.
Not all mothers. And then the baby's not in control, and then bad things happen. We somehow need to figure out how to make them not want to take over. The analogy I often use is, forget about intelligence, just think about physical strength. Suppose you have a nice little tiger cub. It's sort of a bit bigger than a cat. It's really cute. It's very cuddly, very interesting to watch, except that you better be sure that when it grows up, it never wants to kill you, because if it ever wanted to kill you, you'd be dead in a few seconds.
And you're saying the AI we have now is the tiger cub?
Yeah.
And it's growing up?
Yeah.
So we need to train it when it's a baby.
Well, now a tiger has lots of innate stuff built in, so you know when it grows up. It's not a safe thing to have around.
But lions, people that have lions as pets,
Yes.
sometimes the lion is affectionate to its creator, but not to others.
Yes. And we don't know whether these AIs... We simply don't know whether we can make them not want to take over and not want to hurt us.
Do you think we can? Do you think it's possible to train
I don't know.
superintelligence?
I don't think it's clear that we can. So I think it might be hopeless. But I also think we might be able to. And it'd be sort of crazy if people went extinct because we couldn't be bothered to try.
If that's even a possibility, how do you feel about your life's work? Because you were...
Yeah. It sort of takes the edge off it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea is going to be wonderful in healthcare and wonderful in education and wonderful... I mean, it's going to make call centres much more efficient. No one worries a bit about what the people who are doing that job now do. It makes me sad. I don't feel particularly guilty about developing AI like 40 years ago, because at that time we had no idea that this stuff was going to happen this fast. We thought we had plenty of time to worry about things like that. When you can't get the AI to do much and you want to get it to do a little bit more, you don't worry about this stupid little thing is going to take over from people. You just want it to be able to do a little bit more of the things people can do. It's not like I knowingly did something thinking, this might wipe us all out, but I'm going to do it anyway. But it is a bit sad that it's not just going to be something for good. So I feel I have a duty now to talk about the risks.
And if you could play it forward and you could go forward 30, 50 years and you found out that it led to the extinction of humanity, and if that does end up being the outcome.
Well, if you played it forward and it led to the extinction of humanity, I would use that to tell people, to tell their governments that we really have to work on how we're going to keep this stuff under control. I think we need people to tell governments that governments have to force the companies to use their resources to work on safety. And they're not doing much of that because you don't make profits out of it.
One of your students we talked about earlier, Ilya?
Yep.
Ilya left OpenAI.
Yep.
And there was lots of conversation around the fact that he left because he had safety concerns.
Yes.
And he's gone on to set up a AI safety company.
Yes.
Why do you think he left?
I think he left because he had safety concerns.
Really?
I still have lunch with him from time to time.
Oh,
his,
okay.
his parents live in Toronto. When he comes to Toronto, we have lunch together. He doesn't talk to me about what went on at OpenAI, so I have no inside information about that. But I know Ilya very well. And he is genuinely concerned with safety. So I think that's why he left.
Because he was one of the top people. I mean,
He was probably the most important person behind the development of ChatGPT. The early versions, like GPT-2, he was very important in the development of it.
You know him personally, so you know his character.
Yes, he has a good moral compass. He's not like someone like Musk who has no moral compass.
Does Sam Altman have a good moral compass?
We'll see. I don't know Sam, so I don't want to comment on that.
But from what you've seen, are you concerned about the actions that they've taken? Because if you know Ilya's a good guy and he's left.
That would give you some insight, yes. It would give you some reason to believe that there's a problem there. And if you look at Sam's statements some years ago, he sort of happily said in one interview, this stuff will probably kill us all. That's not exactly what he said, but that's what it amounted to. Now he's saying you don't need to worry too much about it. And I suspect that's not driven by seeking after the truth. That's driven by seeking after money.
Is it money or is it power?
Yeah, I shouldn't have said money. It's some combination of those, yes.
Okay, I guess money's a proxy for power, but I've got a friend who's a billionaire, and he is in those circles. And when I went to his house and had lunch with him one day, he knows lots of people in AI, building the biggest AI companies in the world. And he gave me a cautionary warning across his kitchen table in London, where he gave me an insight into the private conversations these people have, not the media interviews they do where they talk about safety and all these things, but actually what some of these individuals think is going to happen.
And what do they think is going to happen?
It's not what they say publicly.
No.
You know, one person who I shouldn't name, who's leading one of the biggest AI companies in the world, he told me that he knows this person very well, and he privately thinks that we're heading towards this kind of dystopian world where we have just huge amounts of free time, we don't work anymore, and this person doesn't really give a fuck about the harm that it's gonna have on the world. And this person, who I'm referring to, is building one of the biggest AI companies in the world. And I then watched this person's interviews online.
Trying to figure out which of three people it is.
Yeah, well, it's one of those three people.
Okay.
And I watched this person's interviews online, and I reflect on the conversation that my billionaire friend had with me, who knows him, and I go, fucking hell, this guy's lying publicly. Like, he's not telling the truth to the world. And that's haunted me a little bit. It's part of the reason I have so many conversations around AI on this podcast, because I'm like, I don't know if I think some of them are a little bit sadistic about power. I think they like the idea that they will change the world, that they will be the one that fundamentally shifts the world.
I think Musk is clearly like that, right?
He's such a complex character that I don't really know how to place Musk.
He's done some really good things, like pushing electric cars. That was a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
Some of the things he said about self-driving were a bit exaggerated, but that was a really useful thing he did. Giving the Ukrainians communication during the war with Russia.
Starlink,
That was a really good thing he did. There's a bunch of things like that. But he's also done some very bad things.
So coming back to this point of the possibility of destruction and the motives of these big companies, are you at all hopeful that anything can be done to slow down the pace and acceleration of AI?
Okay, there's two issues. One is, can you slow it down?
Yeah.
And the other is, can you make it so that it will be safe in the end? It won't wipe us all out. I don't believe we're going to slow it down.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't believe we're going to slow it down is because there's competition between countries and competition between companies within a country. And all of that is making it go faster and faster. And if the US slowed it down, China wouldn't slow it down.
Does Ilya think it's possible to make AI safe?
I think he does. He won't tell me what his secret source is. I'm not sure how many people know what his secret source is. I think a lot of the investors don't know what his secret source is, but they've given him billions of dollars anyway, because they have so much faith in Ilya, which isn't foolish. I mean, he was very important in AlexNet, which got object recognition working well. He was the main force behind the things like GPT-2, which then led to ChatGPT. So I think having a lot of faith in Ilya is a very reasonable decision.
There's something quite haunting about the guy that made and was the main force behind GPT-2, which led rise to this whole revolution, left the company because of safety reasons. He knows something that I don't know about what might happen next.
Well, the company had... No, I don't know the precise details, but I'm fairly sure the company had indicated that it would use a significant fraction of its resources, of the compute time, for doing safety research, and then it reduced that fraction. I think that's one of the things that happened.
Yeah, that was reported publicly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the next one is joblessness.
Yeah.
In the past, new technologies have come in which didn't lead to joblessness. New jobs were created. So the classic example people use is automatic teller machines. When automatic teller machines came in, a lot of bank tellers didn't lose their jobs. They just got to do more interesting things. But here, I think this is more like when they got machines in the Industrial Revolution, and you can't have a job digging ditches now because a machine can dig ditches much better than you can. And I think for mundane intellectual labor, AI is just going to replace everybody. Now, it may well be in the form of you have fewer people using AI assistants. So it's a combination of a person and an AI assistant, and now doing the work that 10 people could do previously.
People say that it will create new jobs, though, so we'll be fine.
Yes, and that's been the case for other technologies, but this is a very different kind of technology. If it can do all mundane human intellectual labor, then what new jobs is it going to create? You'd have to be very skilled to have a job that it couldn't just do. So I don't think they're right. I think you can try and generalize from other technologies that come in, like computers or automatic teller machines, but I think this is different.
People use this phrase, they say, AI won't take your job, a human using AI will take your job.
Yes, I think that's true. But for many jobs, that'll mean you need far fewer people. My niece answers letters of complaint to a health service. It used to take her 25 minutes. She'd read the complaint and she'd think how to reply and she'd write a letter. And now she just scans it into a chatbot and it writes the letter. She just checks the letter. Occasionally she tells it to revise it in some ways. The whole process takes her 5 minutes. That means she can answer 5 times as many letters. And that means they need 5 times fewer of her. So she can do the job that 5 of her used to do. Now, that will mean they need less people. In other jobs, like in healthcare, they're much more elastic. So if you could make doctors 5 times as efficient, we could all have 5 times as much healthcare for the same price. And that would be great. There's almost no limit to how much healthcare people can absorb. They always want more healthcare. There's no cost to it. There are jobs where you can make a person with an AI assistant much more efficient, and you won't lead to less people because you'll just have much more of that being done. But most jobs, I think, are not like that.
Am I right in thinking this sort of industrial revolution played a role in replacing muscles?
Yes, exactly.
And this revolution in AI replaces intelligence, the brain?
Yeah. So mundane intellectual labor is like having strong muscles, and it's not worth much anymore.
So muscles have been replaced. Now intelligence is being replaced.
Yeah.
So what remains?
Maybe for a while some kinds of creativity, but the whole idea of superintelligence is nothing remains. These things will get to be better than us at everything.
So what do we end up doing in such a world?
Well, if they work for us, we end up getting lots of goods and services for not much effort.
Okay. But that sounds tempting and nice, but I don't know, there's a cautionary tale in creating more and more ease for humans in it going badly.
Yes, and we need to figure out if we can make it go well. So the nice scenario is, imagine a company with a CEO who is very dumb, probably the son of the former CEO, and he has an executive assistant who's very smart, and he says, I think we should do this. And the executive assistant makes it all work. The CEO feels great. He doesn't understand that he's not really in control. And in some sense, he is in control. He suggests what